The hangar smelled of blood, scorched metal, and the sharp sting of ozone from energy weapons discharged too close to human skin. Kalin Torres moved with a medic's grim precision, his hands steady even though every muscle in his body screamed from 14 hours of continuous triage. He couldn't afford to stop, not while soldiers lay groaning on stretchers and civilians huddled on cold metal floors, clutching at makeshift bandages. The battle for Kepler 9 was officially over, but sporadic firefights still flared in the distance like dying stars. Victory was just another word for survival. He crouched beside a Marine whose side was blackened with plasma burns, murmuring quiet reassurances as he worked antiseptic foam into the wound. "You'll be fine, just breathe," he said, though. His voice was hoarse, each word pulled from the frayed edges of his endurance. The hangar doors were propped open to allow the medevac transports in and out, but the view beyond was nothing but ruins. The colony's fields, once alive with gold and green, were now charred black. Defensive turrets lay twisted and silent, their wreckage half buried in the ash of the settlement they had failed to save. Kalin rose, scanning the chaos for his next patient, and that was when he saw her. Through the haze of smoke and flickering emergency lights, a figure emerged, walking with the deliberate grace of someone trained to move through pain. She was tall, her silhouette cutting an otherworldly shape against the fractured horizon. Even at a distance, he could tell she wasn't human. Her movements were too fluid, too precise. The battle had stripped away most of her armor's shine, leaving dark cracks along its surface, but the way it clung to her body looked less like protection and more like a living thing holding on. As she stepped closer, the details sharpened. Her skin, where visible beneath the shattered plates, glimmered with a faint blue luminescence, as though starlight pulsed just beneath the surface. Her eyes caught the light deep, intense, carrying exhaustion that spoke of wars far older than this one. Kalin found himself momentarily frozen, a strange, quiet awareness settling over him that this woman had survived hells he couldn't imagine. "Medic," she said, her voice smooth but strained, carrying an accent that made every syllable sound like part of a melody. There was no fear in her tone, only the calm of someone who had long since made peace with the possibility of death. "I need assistance." Kalin shook himself from the haze and gestured toward one of the clear med bays. "Of course. Sit here, I'll check you over." As she moved, he noticed the way her left side was stiff, her steps uneven. She was badly hurt, but still in control. "What's your species?" he asked, pulling on fresh gloves as he scanned her wounds. "It'll help me figure out treatment protocols." "Selie," she said simply, lowering herself onto the examination platform with the slow, careful movements of a warrior who trusted no one but needed help anyway. "I am Zara Kethani. I fought with your forces against the Vacti incursion." Selie. The name stirred something in his memory. They were an ancient warrior culture ghost stories told among soldiers, who whispered about unseen allies appearing when the galaxy's balance tilted toward destruction. If the Selie were here, then Kepler 9's battle had drawn more than just human blood. "I'm Kalin Torres, combat medic," he said, his hands hovering over the damaged plating. The armor was unlike anything he had seen. Its surface shimmered faintly, reacting almost like skin to his touch. "What do you need? Pain suppression? Wound closure?" Zara's eyes met his, and the intensity of her gaze halted him mid-question. "I need help getting out of this armor," she said, her voice steady but carrying a depth he couldn't quite read. Kalin frowned, his fingers brushing along a jagged seam where the armor had cracked. "It's damaged. I can cut you out if I have to." "It's not that simple," she replied, her tone low, almost secretive. She placed her hand over his, her touch warm and strangely grounding. "This armor is not just metal. It is part of me. To remove it is to face more than injuries. It means confronting what I have become." Her words landed with a quiet weight, making the background noise of the hangar fade to nothing. Kalin realized this wasn't just a request for medical aid. Whatever this armor represented to Zara Kethani, it was tied to something deeper, something raw and unspoken that had nothing to do with plasma burns or broken circuits. "Then let's take it off," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "Not just the armor. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. Together." The armor was not designed to be removed by anyone but its wearer. Kalin realized this within minutes of trying to find a seam. The Selie technology was fluid, almost organic, pulsing faintly under his fingertips as though it were alive. Every touch seemed to send a ripple through Zara's body, and her sharp breaths told him that even minor mistakes could cause pain or worse. "The neural interface is here," she said quietly, guiding his hands to points on her torso where the armor merged with her skin. Her luminescence flared briefly, like a heartbeat quickening. "There is a sequence you must follow. If we disconnect it incorrectly, it will send feedback into my nervous system. It could shut me down." "Shut you down?" Kalin repeated, looking up sharply. "Seizures, neural burns. Death, possibly." She said it with the calm detachment of a soldier listing potential outcomes, but her gaze betrayed the strain she was under. Kalin swallowed hard. He had dealt with alien tech before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a machine, it was an extension of her. "All right," he said, voice steady despite the thundering in his chest. "Talk me through it. One step at a time." He began working on the first connection, his fingers tracing the faint grooves that marked the armor's power conduits. As he pressed down, the surface softened, almost like muscle responding to pressure. Zara hissed through her teeth but didn't flinch. "You're doing well," she murmured, her voice like a whisper of steel against stone. "Now the second latch, near my ribs." As Kalin worked, he couldn't ignore the subtle tremors in her body. Each disconnection seemed to strip away not just armor but something deeper, like layers of discipline and control. "How long have you been in this?" he asked, focusing on the delicate work. 6 months, she said, her voice thin. 6 months of continuous combat. Every emotion, anger, fear, even grief has been filtered through the armor's tactical algorithms. It tells me when to fight, when to strike. I'm not sure who I am without it. Kalin paused, his hands resting on the next latch. He recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd heard in veterans who didn't know how to return home, who had become so defined by war that peace felt alien. "You'll remember," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. "You sound certain." "I'm not," he admitted. "But I know what happens if you keep hiding behind something that numbs you. Eventually, you forget what it's like to feel at all." Her eyes lingered on him for a long moment. "You speak as if you understand." "Because I do," Kalin said quietly. "I've been running triage for years. You learn to block it out, the screams, the faces of the ones you can't save. You become efficient, detached, and one day, you wake up and realize you can't remember the last time you felt anything other than exhaustion." Zara tilted her head slightly, studying him. "So you are removing armor as well?" He gave a humorless smile. "Just a different kind." The third latch disengaged with a low hum, and the armor seemed to shiver, releasing its hold on her midsection. As Kalin worked lower, he could feel the faint vibrations of energy fading, like a dying heartbeat. Zara exhaled shakily, her body trembling now that the enhancements were peeling away. Without them, she looked smaller, almost vulnerable. "You'll feel exposed for a while," Kalin said, his voice softer now. "That's normal." "Exposed," she echoed, as though testing the word on her tongue. "I feel lighter." "And afraid." "Afraid of what?" She hesitated. "Of who I am when there is no war, when I am not a weapon." The word struck something deep within Kalin. He reached for the last connection at her spine. His hand steady but his voice low and certain. "You're more than a weapon. You survived when others didn't. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who can still protect others." Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, the hangar around them seemed to fade into silence. There was no distant gunfire, no wounded groans, just the two of them, suspended in that fragile moment between who they were and who they might become. The final lock released with a soft sigh, and the armor's plates folded back, curling away from her body like petals retreating from the cold. Zara sat there, bare-skinned except for the glowing traceries of her Selie patterns, which pulsed faintly in shades of blue and violet. Without the armor's harsh edges, she seemed almost ethereal. Kalin stepped back, momentarily stunned. "You're incredible," he said before he could stop himself. Zara's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Not incredible. Just alive, for the first time in a long time." But before the quiet could settle, the distant sound of energy discharges echoed through the hangar's ventilation system. Kalin froze. Zara's head snapped up, her patterns flashing in sharp, warning colors. "Vacti," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "They're here." The fragile piece shattered. Kalin's hand went instinctively to the medical kit at his side, but his eyes locked on hers. There was no armor now, just the warrior beneath, and whatever fight was coming, they'd face it together. The hiss of Vacti breathing apparatus echoed through the hangar's ducts like the whisper of predators closing in. Kalin's pulse hammered in his ears as he grabbed the nearest plasma cutter, knowing it was a poor excuse for a weapon. Around them, wounded soldiers and civilians stirred in confusion, their fear spiking like static in the charged air. The emergency lights overhead flickered, casting the hangar in rhythmic shadows that made every movement feel like an ambush waiting to happen. Zara was already on her feet, moving with a predatory grace that defied her recent exhaustion. Without the Selie armor, she looked unprotected, yet somehow more dangerous, as if her body itself had been trained to be the weapon. She plucked a rifle from the hand of an unconscious Marine, testing the weight with a casual roll of her wrist. Before glancing back at Kalin, "How many exits?" she asked, voice clipped but calm. "Two, both on the east and north sides. But the north gate's open. If they're here, that's where they'll come through first." He could feel the sweat on his palms as he pointed toward the far end of the hangar, where shadows danced unnaturally across the walls. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a shower of sparks as plasma fire carved a hole through one of the ventilation grates. A hiss, wet and mechanical, crawled through the space. The first Vacti infiltrator dropped down, its obsidian exoskeleton gleaming under the emergency lights. It was taller even than Zara, with angular limbs and razor-like appendages, designed for close-quarters slaughter. Behind the medbay, Kalin whispered, positioning himself between the wounded and the threat. He hated the tremor in his voice. "Stay with the wounded," Zara said, already moving forward, the rifle steady against her shoulder. Her luminescent skin patterns shifted into a deep violet, like storm clouds swirling beneath the surface. The first shot rang out, a clean burst of light that took the Vacti through the chest. It screeched, a sound like tearing metal, before crumpling to the floor, but that was just the beginning. More shadows slithered through the ducts, and the sound of chitin scraping metal filled the hangar. Kalin's breath caught as three more of the creatures dropped down in unison, their jointed legs snapping into position with unnerving precision. Zara didn't hesitate. She surged forward with impossible speed, using the medbay's overturned gurney as cover. Her movements were fluid and unpredictable, every shot deliberate. Kalin found himself shouting intel between treating wounds his medic's eye-spotting. structural weak points and tactical advantages. 2 coming left fuel tanks behind them. Use the reflection panel to blind them. She didn't question him. With a sharp movement, she angled her shot off a reflective shard of metal, catching one of the Vacti in its eye cluster. It convulsed violently and collapsed. The other rushed her, but she rolled beneath its lashing limbs, snatched a fallen vibroblade, and severed its spine with one smooth strike. Kalin was halfway through stabilizing a soldier's bleeding arm when another Vacti dropped down near the civilians. He didn't think. He grabbed a broken med tray and hurled it with all his strength, the metal edge slamming into the creature's face just as Zara vaulted over a barricade to finish it with a burst of fire. "Nice aim," she called out, her tone almost playful despite the carnage. "Not really my specialty," he muttered, forcing his shaking hands back into steady precision as he sutured another wound. "But I'm learning." The firefight raged for what felt like hours but could only have been minutes. Every second stretched, every scream and flash of plasma burning itself into Kalin's memory. Zara fought like a force of nature, unbound now by the armor's tactical algorithms. There was something raw in the way she moved, a warrior's instinct unfiltered by cold calculations. And it was terrifyingly effective. When the last Vacti fell, the hangar went eerily silent. Kalin looked around, chest heaving, and realized everyone, every single wounded soldier and terrified civilian was still alive. Zara stood at the center of the hangar, her weapon lowered, her patterns fading from battle violet to a calm pale blue. The smell of burned alien chitin mixed with the antiseptic tang of the medical bay. "You fought like—" Kalin started, but the words died on his tongue. Not like a soldier, he thought. Not like anything human. Like someone who has something to protect, Zara finished for him, her gaze unwavering. "I fight differently without the armor. It no longer tells me who to save or who to kill. It's just me. And them." Kalin stepped closer, still holding a bloodied bandage. "And that's better?" "It's real," she said simply. "It's not efficient, but it's real." For a moment, there was no war, no burned world outside, just the quiet between. Them, broken only by the soft hum of medical machines. He realized then that Zara wasn't just removing armor, she was rediscovering herself. And maybe, in a way he hadn't expected, she was helping him do the same. But before he could say anything, the base's intercom crackled, static cutting through the silence. "Alert! Vacti reinforcement fleets inbound. All medical personnel. Prepare for mass casualty protocols." Zara's expression hardened, but there was no fear, only resolve. "It seems our work isn't finished." Kalin exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "Then we'd better survive this," he said, meeting her gaze. "Because something tells me, Zara, this isn't just about a war anymore. It's about us." The first tremor rippled through the hangar like a living thing, shaking dust loose from the rafters. Kalin braced himself against a wall, his fingers tightening around the edge of a medical cot as the low, vibrating hum of Vacti warships filled the night sky. Outside, the horizon burned crimson, the reflection of plasma bombardments painting the world in bloody strokes. The reinforcements had arrived fast, brutal, and determined to finish what the first attack had failed to do: shut the gates. Kalin barked to the few able-bodied Marines still in the hangar. "Seal every vent, every hatch. If they come in through the ducts again, we won't hold." Zara stood near the open hangar door, her silhouette etched against the glowing chaos outside. The wind caught strands of her pale hair, whipping them across her face, but her posture remained unwavering, like a blade poised for the next strike. She looked back at him, the faint glow of her luminescent skin patterns shifting into hues of amber and deep violet, colors that pulsed like a storm gathering beneath her skin. "They won't wait for us to fortify," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the certainty of someone who had read the battlefield 100 times before. They'll come hard and fast. This time they won't just target your soldiers. They'll go for the wounded. Kalin's throat tightened. He glanced over his shoulder at the rows of injured men and women who couldn't even stand, let alone fight. His triage area looked less like a medical bay and more like a sanctuary for the broken, and if the Vacti breached the hangar, these people would be slaughtered. "What do you need?" he asked Zara, already moving to gather supplies. "Weapons? Barriers?" Her gaze softened for a moment, an expression that carried both gratitude and something unspoken. "I need you to trust me. We're going to build a trap." Within minutes, they turned the hangar into a death maze. Zara directed. Kalin and the Marines with crisp, decisive instructions. She knew how to turn every crate, stretcher, and broken transport into an advantage. Medical carts became mobile shields. Steel diagnostic tables were flipped to form barricades. They rigged fuel cells and plasma cutters to create improvised explosive choke points. Kalin worked without hesitation, his medic's brain now split. Between saving lives and preparing to end them, the first shriek of a Vacti assault cannon cut through the air, a sound like molten glass shattering. Sparks exploded near the hangar's open threshold, and the gates shuddered under the pressure. The Marines gripped their rifles tighter, exchanging tense glances. Kalin's heart pounded as he loaded a plasma cartridge into a weapon he barely knew how to use. He wasn't a soldier, but tonight he couldn't afford to just be a medic. "They're breaching," Zara said, her voice sharp and clear. She stood in front of the wounded, her body relaxed in a way that only the deadliest warriors ever seemed to manage. "Remember, Torres, stay low. Your focus is keeping them alive. I'll handle the rest." The gates exploded inward. The Vacti swarmed through in a nightmare wave of black chitin and burning plasma. They were faster this time, more aggressive, their movements like liquid shadows cutting through steel. The first one lunged at a Marine to Zara's left. Before Kalin could even shout, Zara moved so fast she seemed to blur, snapping the alien's neck with a fluid twist before pivoting to fire a clean shot through another's skull. The hangar became a storm of chaos. Plasma blasts painted the walls in searing light. Kalin ducked behind an overturned stretcher, dragging a wounded soldier with him as the air filled with the acrid scent of burning metal and blood. He felt the impact of alien rounds slam into the barricades they'd built, each strike a reminder of how thin their line of defense was. "Left flank 2 incoming," Kalin shouted, pointing as he applied pressure to a Marine's leg wound. Zara didn't miss a beat. She vaulted over the barricade, a streak of violet light against the dark, and dropped both attackers with precision shots, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. A plasma bolt ripped past Kalin's shoulder, scorching the floor near his hand. He rolled, grabbed a fallen rifle, and fired blindly into the chaos. The weapon's recoil nearly knocked him back, but he saw one of the Vacti stumble and crumple, its body sizzling. The medic in him recoiled at the violence, but the survivor in him had no choice but to adapt, get them to the inner shelter. Kalin called to the Marines, pointing toward the wounded. "Move now, go." But before anyone could move, the hangar floor shook violently. A massive Vacti brute, at least twice the height of a human, forced its way through the shattered gate. Its armored carapace gleamed like obsidian, its glowing mandibles clicking with anticipation. One strike from its claws could tear a man in half. "Stay back," Zara warned, stepping forward. She discarded her rifle, it would barely scratch. The brute grabbed a long vibroblade from the fallen. Her skin flared bright, patterns of electric blue and white pulsing across her body like lightning. "This one is mine." The brute charged, slamming through crates and barricades like they were paper. Zara met it head on, her blade slicing against its armor with sparks flying. The clash was brutal, primal, a dance of predator and predator. Kalin watched, frozen between awe and terror, as she ducked beneath its claws and drove the blade deep into a joint. The creature roared, swinging its massive arm and sending her flying across the hangar. Zara! Kalin ran to her side, skidding on the slick floor. Blood traced a glowing line down her arm, but her eyes burned with determination. "You can't help me up," she said, cutting him off with a tone that brooked no argument. He hauled her to her feet, feeling the heat radiating from her body. "We end this now." Together they set the trap. Kalin lured the brute toward the fuel cells, ducking and weaving as plasma bolts scorched the ground. Zara used the last of her strength to slice open a power conduit, the sparks crackling ominously. "Now, Torres," she shouted. Kalin fired a single shot at the rigged fuel line. The explosion tore through the hangar with a deafening roar. Heat slammed into Kalin like a wall, knocking him backward. The brute let out a screeching wail before collapsing in a burning heap, its armor cracking apart like shattered glass. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of survivors. The remaining Vacti scattered, retreating into the night. Kalin sat on the floor, his chest heaving, his ears ringing from the blast. Through the haze of smoke, Zara stood battered, bloodied, but victorious. Her luminescent patterns had shifted to soft gold, a color he instinctively understood as calm. You just saved all of them," Kalin said, his voice raw. Zara's gaze softened, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something like peace in her eyes. "Not alone," she said. "Never alone." Before Kalin could respond, the base alarm crackled to life. Long-range scans indicate multiple Vacti ships entering atmosphere. "This isn't over." Zara turned toward him, her expression unreadable but fierce. "Then we fight again. But this time, Torres, we do it not just to survive. We do it to end this." The hangar was a graveyard of silence after the last Vacti corpse was dragged away. Smoke curled lazily from the wreckage, rising in thin gray spirals that carried the acrid stench of burned chitin and scorched steel. Kalin Torres stood at the edge of the triage zone, his hands trembling as he scrubbed dried blood from his palms. His gloves were gone, melted during the explosion that had ended the brute. His skin stung with burns, but he didn't care. All around him, soldiers groaned softly, machines beeped warnings, and the low murmur of survivors' voices mingled with the hum of failing generators. Every sound felt too loud, too real, after the deafening chaos of the battle. He turned when he felt a presence behind him. Zara Kethani was standing there, tall despite the exhaustion etched into her posture. Her luminescent patterns pulsed dimly, shifting from deep indigo to pale silver and soft waves like moonlight on water. She'd cleaned the blood from her skin, but her cuts and burns were still raw. Without her armor, without the weight of the Selie's war machine enhancements, she seemed both vulnerable and unbreakable, a paradox that Kalin couldn't stop staring at. "You're hurt," he said, his voice lower than he intended. He grabbed his medical kit out of reflex, the healer in him overriding the exhaustion that wanted to drag him to the floor. Zara gave a faint smile, one corner of her mouth tilting upward. "So are you, medic." Her voice was softer now, no longer the sharp tone of a warrior giving orders. It was warm, tired, but alive. "You saved them all. I have seen human medics before, but none fight as you do." Kalin shook his head, crouching to inspect the gash along her shoulder. "I don't fight like you. I just refuse to let anyone die on my watch." His hands hovered over her injury, his mind flickering to every patient he'd lost in the last 14 hours. He swallowed the knot in his throat. "Sometimes I think I'm just patching holes in a sinking ship." "You kept this ship afloat," Zara said, her gaze locking with his. For a moment, Kalin forgot about the ruined hangar and the blood on his hands. She was watching him not like a patient observing a medic, but like someone who understood exactly what kind of weight he carried. In my culture, we honor those who protect life. You would be called Heart Shield. The word struck him harder than any compliment he'd ever received. Heart Shield. He almost laughed, but his chest was too tight to let the sound out. I don't think I've earned a title like that. Zara tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing. Titles are not earned. They are revealed. You do not see what I see. Kalin focused on cleaning the wound, the sterile cloth gliding over her blue skin. She barely flinched, but her pattern shifted, rippling with colors he hadn't learned to interpret yet. "What do you see?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. A man who carries the lives of others in his hands, and yet thinks his own is unworthy of saving, she said simply. Your armor is not metal, Kalin Torres. It is silence. It is work that leaves no time for you to feel. He froze, the cloth pausing against her skin. She had seen through him with terrifying clarity, and he didn't know how to respond. Maybe. I don't want to feel, he admitted quietly. Feelings get in the way. They make you hesitate, and hesitation gets people killed. Zara leaned forward slightly, her presence close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. Feelings give meaning to why you save them, she said. They give you the strength to fight, not just survive. The moment hung between them, heavy and electric, until a sudden burst of static from the intercom broke the quiet. Alert! Vacti strike carriers approaching outer orbit. Estimated time to contact, 36 minutes. Kalin exhaled, his hands tightening around the edge of his medkit. So that's it? We just keep going until they crush us? Zara stood, her posture straightening despite the pain lancing through her body. No, she said, her voice hardening. Like tempered steel, we don't wait for them to crush us. We strike back. He looked at her, stunned. With what? We're barely holding this together. Her expression shifted, and for the first time since he met her, a glimmer of something like hope sparked in her eyes. The Selie do not fight with just weapons, she said. We fight with will. We use what we have, no matter how little. And we make it enough. You have strength you do not see. You sound like you've already decided I'm part of this fight. You are, Zara said, stepping closer. I've fought alongside soldiers, hunters, killers. But you fight because you care, even when it hurts. That is rarer than any weapon. Before Kalin could respond, the ground shook violently, the vibrations traveling up through the steel floor. The lights flickered, dimmed, then snapped back with a surge. The outer defenses had engaged. The war wasn't done, not even close. Zara reached for him, her hand resting on his wrist. The touch was grounding, solid. Stay with me, Heartshield, she said, her voice low but steady. I think we're going to need each other before this is over. Kalin met her gaze and felt something shift like the moment just before a storm breaks. He nodded, not trusting himself to say the thousand things that filled his mind. The sirens wailed again, louder this time, cutting through the silence of the wounded hangar. The countdown to the next wave had begun, and this time Kalin wasn't just a medic. He was part of something larger, something fierce. The countdown had already begun, and every second felt like borrowed time. Kalin Torres moved through the hangar with the intensity of someone who understood that failure meant not just defeat, but extinction. The air was alive with tension soldiers, strapping on what little armor remained, wounded civilians being moved into reinforced corners, and the low mechanical hum of damaged systems straining to hold the perimeter shields. Overhead, the distant thunder of Vacti carriers breaking through the upper atmosphere reverberated like approaching storms. Zara Kethani stood at the center of it all, a still point in the chaos. She'd commandeered a section of the hangar floor and turned it into a makeshift command zone, spreading out maps, holographic schematics, and whatever sensor data they could salvage from the battered base. Her luminescent patterns pulsed in deliberate rhythms as she traced lines of attack across the displays, her alien mind calculating probabilities faster than any human officer could. "They'll land here," she said, tapping her finger against the northeast perimeter on a holographic projection. "And here, multiple insertion teams no more than 6 minutes apart. They'll expect you to retreat inward, so we will not retreat." Kalin blinked, still catching his breath from the last battle. "Not retreat? Zara, we barely held this hangar." "We're running out of medpacks, out of ammo, out of will," she interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind. Her eyes met his with a quiet ferocity. "The Vacti believe in numbers and overwhelming force. The Selie believe in precision, in striking where they are weakest. We will not fight like prey. We will fight like hunters." Kalin wanted to argue, but something in her presence silenced him. Zara didn't just radiate confidence. She made you believe that survival was possible even in the face of annihilation. He found himself nodding before he even realized he'd agreed. "What do you need me to do?" "Everything you can," she said, moving closer. "You know this facility better than anyone. Every hallway, every choke point, every supply cache. We will combine Selie tactics with your knowledge of this place." He hesitated. "You mean turn the hangar into a trap?" "Not just the hangar," Zara replied, her voice low and steady. "The entire outpost." Over the next 20 minutes, they worked with a synergy that surprised them both. Zara taught the Marines how to create Selie-style ambush patterns, blending misdirection with controlled chaos. Kalin rigged the medbay's backup power grid to deliver electrical shocks through certain corridors, creating impromptu kill zones. Fuel canisters were repurposed into explosive traps, while collapsed shipping containers became armored barricades. It was a brutal, desperate kind of ingenuity, but every soldier and medic in the hangar felt the shift. This was no longer a waiting game. It was a planned dot. At one point, Zara crouched beside Kalin as they welded shut a secondary hatch. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his arms trembled from exhaustion, but she steadied his hands without saying a word. The warmth of her touch jolted him more than any caffeine injection could. "You're shaking," she murmured, her voice softer now. "I'm fine," Kalin muttered, though his voice was raw. "Just been awake too long. Too many people to save." Zara tilted her head, studying him. "And who saves you?" He looked up, startled. Her glowing eyes held a depth he couldn't look away from. "No one," he said quietly. "I guess I never thought about it." "You should," she said, her tone carrying a surprising gentleness. "Even a heart shield needs a shield." Before he could respond, the ground trembled again, stronger this time. The warning sirens wailed, red lights flashing across the ceiling. The sound of heavy engines and screaming atmospheric burns filled the air as the first Vacti strike carrier descended. Beyond the perimeter wall. "They're early," Kalin muttered, glancing at the timer. "We're not ready. We will never be ready," Zara said, rising to her full height and grabbing a plasma rifle from the weapons rack. "We fight anyway." The first impact shook the walls, dust raining from the ceiling. A soldier stumbled past, shouting about breached outer defenses. Kalin could feel the fear rising around them like a tide, but then he saw Zara standing tall, her patterns blazing bright violet and gold, a living beacon of defiance. Somehow, that sight burned the fear right out of him. "Kalin," she said, turning to face him, "stay near me. We move together. If they break through, we protect the wounded first." "You're assuming I can fight like you," he said with a weak smile. "You can fight like you," she countered, "and that will be enough." The outer blast doors screamed as Vacti plasma fire began melting through the reinforced steel. The air filled with the scent of ozone and burning metal. Kalin took his place beside her, rifle trembling in his hands, but his heart steadier than it had ever been. Every muscle in his body told him to run, but he didn't. Not this time. The door exploded inward in a spray of molten shards. The first wave of Vacti stormed through sleek, black, and lethal. Zara moved like lightning, cutting them down with pinpoint shots and fluid strikes. Kalin covered the wounded, firing when he could, shouting warnings when he saw flanking maneuvers. The sound of battle returned, deafening and all-consuming, but this time it felt different. It wasn't chaos. It was war with purpose. Zara leapt onto a collapsed barricade, cutting off a Vacti squad before they could reach the medical zone. "Kalin!" she shouted, her voice rising above the screams of weapons fire. "Left corridor now." He didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the left corridor, pulling a wounded Marine with him. Behind him, he heard Zara's rifle fire and the wet crunch of alien bodies hitting the ground. Every sound was a promise. She would hold the line and he would keep people alive. The wave kept coming, relentless. And as Kalin reloaded with shaking hands, he realized that what they were doing wasn't just surviving. It was changing them both. Piece by piece, moment by moment, they were shedding the armor hers made of alien metal. His made of silence and becoming something neither of them had been before. "Zara," he called out, firing another burst. "I hope you have a plan for when we run out of ammo." She turned, a feral grin flashing across her blood-stained face. "Then we use everything else." A cinematic sci-fi short film scene in a futuristic industrial hangar, where a human man and a blue-skinned alien warrior woman stand inches apart, locked in an intense and emotional stare. The alien woman, with glowing eyes, intricate white braids and metallic armor, radiates strength and vulnerability. The man, wearing a rugged gray jacket, gently places his hands on her chest armor as if reassuring her. The camera slowly circles them, capturing close-ups of their faces and the metallic details of her armor, while ambient mechanical sounds and soft futuristic lighting create a tense yet intimate atmosphere.